Alrighty, so here we are today. My name is Alana May Mitchell, and this is our first conversation that we are holding for the Being Brave Foundation, which is about opening up on your vulnerabilities and sharing in the context of mental health. And today, the person who has so bravely come forward and before I knew him, shared his story is Ben Jeffries. And Ben Jeffries is the CEO of Pontypool RFC Rugby Football Club, I think.
That's
And
right.
yes, and he is here. So Ben, say hello to everyone.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me on, Alana. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. So welcome. And to give you a bit of background about Ben's story is that he made the decision to share his mental health experiences with people in LinkedIn posts and also in a blog that he has started up. And we'll touch a bit on that today as well. So I'll ask Ben to share a bit about his story in the headlines of what your story is to do with opening up and mental health. So take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Alana, again. And yeah, I've had a fairly difficult relationship with my mental health over the years, and I spent so many years, first of all, not understanding what it was that I was suffering with as a child and into my teenage years. And even 10, 15 years ago, I think the world was a very different place. Excuse me. It was a lot less tolerant towards mental health problems, and you weren't really encouraged to speak out. So I was trying to figure that out on my own a lot over the years. And I now know that as a child and into my teenage years, I was suffering with obsessive compulsive disorder to start with, which centered around a fear of germs and catching illnesses. And I used that as a coping mechanism to deal with that. But as I got into my late teens and early 20s, I really started to struggle quite badly with depression and anxiety, which has unfortunately stayed with me to this day. And I think there's a realization now with myself that it's something that you kind of stuck with for the rest of your life. But it's possible to manage the conditions and find some coping strategies. So I suppose that's part of why I shared my story in a way. Was it was part of the therapy for myself after falling into a pretty dark place a few months ago. And to be honest, I've just been absolutely blown away with the response. And even speaking to yourself many thousands of miles away about this topic, which clearly is, I think, fantastic because it's, as you say, it's ignited a conversation and bringing people together.
Yeah, and a long story there for you in terms of the experiences that you've had. And I think touching on that place of coming to manage it, and also what I encourage is acceptance as well, just complete acceptance in that it's here to stay. There may be some ups and downs, but you'll get through it in the whole. You mentioned around sharing your story. So why did you decide to share your story?
It's a strange one, really, because I've been speaking about my mental health for a few years now, and I think it just came from the point of spending so many years, as I said, hiding and isolating myself. And it's actually really quite tiring when you're trying to live a lie, so to speak, when you're battling with all of these challenges privately and internally. But you give off an impression that you've got everything figured out in your life and everything's really positive, and that's really very draining. And I sort of fell into that trap again before I ended up in hospital most recently, where privately I was in a very, very difficult position. I was struggling immensely with my mental health, but trying to give the impression of the complete opposite. And that just wore me out, to be quite honest. And when I went into hospital, the club issued a statement saying that I'd be taking a leave of absence, and the club supported me very much, which I'm very grateful for. And when I came out, I was just met with a lot of messages of kindness and support, and it sort of compelled me to share more about my story, if you will, really in the hope of helping somebody else, because the support I had was a huge boost to me when I came out of hospital, and I just thought it was a good opportunity to share that despite there being some people who are still a little bit old-fashioned in their views towards mental health, there's a lot of people out there who are going through something similar or have their own experiences, and it's quite empowering to have that support along the way.
Absolutely. And I echo my experience with my organization as well. I had been just total support. I had a contrasting experience there, where there wasn't that same support at another organization, but where I currently am, my gosh. And it's just, as you've mentioned, the theme there of just a welcoming in open arms as well there. So that's beautiful. That's really beautiful to hear that from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had something else to share?
Yeah, it's just I think it shows the progression that's being made in this subject. You know, I think when I first started to struggle and was battling with this alone, certainly here in the United Kingdom, I think the attitude was you were either sane or not sane, and I think people took a pretty dim view on those who had those struggles. But now there is certainly an attitude change over here, and hopefully further afield as well. But you know, I think by having these conversations, it does show that there's a lot more progress to be made as well.
Yeah, and you're key in that as well. I mean, you're opening up and sharing the story of what happened, to share that with people, and then for them to hear it, and then to connect with you, and then to really like tune into that and see that you are really capable, as well as having this thing going on for you at the same time. Yeah. And what was the response? You mentioned there before that there was, like, it was overwhelming for you. What was that response, and how did you go about sharing your story, and what do people come back and reflect back to you?
Well, I think it was just the sheer level, I think, of support, and you know, I'm a very very small fish in a big pond over here, and the fact that so many people took the time to reach out to me, it was very overwhelming, to be honest. And it was just a case of many messages, so whether it was phone calls, texts, private messages on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever it may be, even just people offering their support. But there was a lot of people who resonated and had their own struggles with whether it be OCD, depression, whatever it may be, and you know, people thanking me for sharing that with other people, which I found, again, very overwhelming. And I've just been really I found it very heartwarming that there's so many people out there who would take the time to encourage someone who's clearly had some difficulties in recent months. And it really sort of inspired me then to write the blog and take it one step further, really. So as I said, the blog has been for that purpose, but I think it's also been part of my own therapy as well, where you know, by putting some stuff down on paper, which I probably haven't done so often, has helped me sort of rationalize what's going on in my life. Because, like you say, it's a lifelong process, and getting that acceptance, I think, is a huge step towards finding some sense of recovery. Because you know, I think when you stop fighting against it and just learn ways to manage it, I think that's where the strength comes from. So I suppose that's a part of the blog, and part of this conversation and the process is accepting it, and, as you said just now, showing that you can have a functional life, and you can be productive, and you can achieve things in spite of suffering with a mental health condition. So I think the support that people give along the way really help you move forward and keep going when things may seem a bit difficult.
And do you think that the sharing and the response that you've got, and that overwhelming, like, heartwarming feelings that you've had, do you think that that's given a new meaning potentially to what it means to have a mental illness for you?
That's a good question, and I think I think on the one hand, certainly in the industry I work in, sport and rugby in particular, uh, it's a very aggressive industry, and you're encouraged to be strong and not show any form of weakness. And I think that was one of the things that I wrestled with before coming out and sharing this, because I think my concern was that, you know, people would view you as having a vulnerability that could be exploited in, whether it be in a negotiation or a general business transaction or whatever it may be. But I think the messages of support and the general response sort of take that away. And I think that's the key thing is, it just highlights how much issues there are in society with mental health. And I think the big concern for me was just how many people shared with me their story, but they were only sharing it with me, and but they didn't feel that their family or their friends or their work colleagues were people that share it with. And I think that's the concern, is that there's still a lot of people who are going through their own journey or battle or whatever it may be on their own in isolation. And I think that's a big concern to me, because the messages of support I've had have been hugely encouraging and have given me a lift. But there's a lot of people who aren't getting that support and aren't getting that encouragement. And, you know, from my own perspective, that feeling of isolation and that feeling that nobody will understand is what really allows the depression or whatever it may be to grow. So as you say, I think having this sort of conversation is great, because it hopefully shows that you can have some problems with your mental health, but have a very productive life alongside it.
And for those people, if there was someone who was tuning in who hadn't even gone to the extent of sharing their story with you, or were just traveling through on their own, would you have a message for them?
I would. I mean, I suppose everybody's perspective and everybody's approach is different, but I would always encourage people, if they feel they can, to just reach out and speak to somebody. I've been very fortunate with my support network. I've got a tremendous wife who's seen me at all my lowest moments, and a great group of friends who have been very supportive to me along the way. And just having somebody as a sounding board, I think, can be hugely helpful, because one of the things I identified in recent months before I ended up in hospital was I'd stopped talking to people and I'd stopped that conversation. And I think I felt a pressure, because I'd spoken out a few years ago and I'd been involved with some charities and very much presented as a success story of mental health. I found it really difficult to admit almost that I'd suffered a setback and was struggling again. And I fell into that trap of isolating myself and trying to give a bit of a visage that I was absolutely fine in public, but privately I was struggling immensely. And I just I fell into that trap, and it all came from isolation. And when you have a very tired and fatigued mind and all you're relying on is that to get you through the day and to work through your problems, I think that's where the danger starts. And it was only really through talking to my support network that I was able to sort of get signposted to some help. And I think if I'd had gone through that on my own, I'm you know, who knows where I would have ended up. So I think it's just to try and speak to somebody and know that there are a lot of people in this world who can empathize with them and know what they're going through.
Yeah, to absolutely reach out to someone in their support networks, and the empathy part really, because, you know, one conversation will turn into another, and then before you know it, you've got an army of supporters out there for you as well. And I'm interested in what you received as a result of sharing your conversation. So lots of messages, but has there been an impact on you, like a shift in you as a result of sharing your story?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think what's great about this process, if there is a positive of it, is that by continuing the conversation, whether it be a blog or these interviews or whatever it may be, I think it's really encouraging me to be more open-minded to learning lessons. And I think the one thing I'm really appreciating a lot more is just how fragile recovery can be, and how much you have to work every day to keep that focus and to keep that discipline. It's certainly in my case, and an awareness of triggers and things which may set you back. So I suppose last week was an example, it being Father's Day. It's something on my calendar which I dread, to be honest with you. And
Oh, okay.
the backstory being that my wife suffers with a condition called endometriosis,
Yes.
and it means that we're not able to have children. And every year, I know it's something, but comes around, and I hate Father's Day, but
Mm.
I sort of over the last week sort of fell into that trap a little bit of feeling a bit down about that, because it obviously brings up some memories, and then my appetite to work out and stay healthy sort of vanished a bit, and then my discipline with my diet went out the window a little bit. And what I've noticed is one or two little things go away, and then your motivation for everything else sort of slips away quite quickly. And I think that's the precarious place which I've always found myself in, on that precipice almost. So I think the impact all of this has had on me is I was able to identify that quite quickly, and sort of get my equilibrium back quite quickly, just through an awareness, and by having these conversations with people. Whereas I think previously, when I wasn't having these conversations very often, that often case would lead me into a bit of a spiral over a longer period of time. So and that's the positive impact and the power of conversation, really, that is just sort of kept me fresh and alert to the pitfalls of my mental health, and has allowed me to remedy that quite quickly.
And even I think having insight into yourself, so you can see when those like things might slide slightly, and you can catch them as well before it comes into a bigger thing. Really is my take out there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I've certainly identified that the quicker you can identify it and remedy when it's a small issue, or a small series of issues that you can quite quickly remedy, it's a lot easier to do it at that stage than it become part of a bigger problem. And that's certainly where I ended up a few months ago. I just got completely lost, because day after day turned into week after week, and then that turned into month after month. And it's very hard to come back from that. So again, that's the positive impact of having such conversations like this.
Yeah, catching it early, hey? Being with people who can see that in you. And if people are more interested in reading about you and your story and what you've been through and what you're sharing now, where can they find that?
So Twitter is probably the best place to find me, and my handle is Ben Jeffries. And on my profile there's a link to my blog and my other Twitter page, where all my blog posts are kept. And but anywhere really on social media, LinkedIn, whatever it may be. I was quite surprised. I put this on LinkedIn, and obviously that's how I met yourself. And
Yes.
I didn't really expect much of it. I just put it on there. It was my first LinkedIn post, actually.
Oh
And
my gosh.
and it just went crazy. So clearly LinkedIn is a really powerful tool for this subject. And I was very surprised by that. So yeah, LinkedIn or Twitter, as I say, is probably the best place to find me.
Yeah, and what blog? I'm interested. What blog are you writing at the moment? Have you got one on the go?
I have, and it was on really what we were just talking about, how recovery is not a linear process, I think. And because a lot of what I blogged about, it's only been a few posts, but it's been about what I went through and where I'm going. But I feel it's probably important to blog about the setbacks as well, because I think that they're where the learning points come from. So yeah, and that's another thing. You know, I had, like I said, a bit of a challenging week last week, but just being able to put that on paper and process it and work through it, it really gave me a lot of clarity. So hopefully when I put that out, if that can help somebody else along the way, then that's great too.
Definitely some clarity shining through there from your writing as well. It's definitely a process. Your writing and sharing is definitely a process that I'm familiar with and that I found has impacted others and impacted myself through it as well. So it's good to hear. Awesome to hear. Well, I might leave the interview there. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, Ben?
No, just thank you very much again for the opportunity, and I think it's really great that you know, you're putting this series together, and I'm sure it will help a lot of people along the way. So thanks again for the opportunity.
You're most welcome. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.